Good afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to welcome you all again in the afternoon. Mayuri Ghosh, I'm the Director for Climate Resilience and Sustainability at the Clinton Global Initiative, which is one of the other initiatives to our sister entity, Too Small to Fail. I am a mom as well of two daughters, 7 and 11 years old. And it's a very different community I'm speaking with today, as I was just telling my colleagues at the Clinton Foundation. So usually I'm speaking to the climate community. I think heard from you just last. So it's good to connect and establish, the bonds between our communities of climate and sustainability actors, as well as those who are working with children, which is one of the most impacted communities of climate. Very quickly, in terms of my personal story, so I actually was working in the private sector in India. And when I moved to the US, I wanted to work with children in the public sector. And I knew about only the UN at that point and UNICEF. And during my early, university years here at Columbia, I went back to India to do an internship in my home state in the villages, which I had never visited growing up there. And while this was meant to be a social policy planning, monitoring, evaluation effort to understand access to health, education, WASH programs, maternal health, etc., all people talked about was that they did not have access to water, and how, in many cases, children who were going to the public schools in India, in the rural communities, mainly for the midday meals, and for the girls, access to toilets, which they didn't have at home, it actually prevented them because they were going far distances to fetch water on foot. And because the grasslands were drying up, and back in those days, about 15 years back, we didn't really talk about climate and sustainability. And even little kids had to really not drop out of schools because the agricultural lands were drying up, and they had to figure out alternate sources of income and so on. Fast forward many years, when I went to the World Economic Forum, one of the initiatives we were leading was around healthy cities and communities, and we've talked a lot about cities today. And there's a framework, without even talking about climate and sustainability, around healthy living, which is about nutrition, sanitation, physical activity, rest, sleep, environment, and financing. And climate in one way or the other impacts everything, because there is water and food insecurity, there is heat and heat islands, and there may be inaccess to green spaces. Many cases, heat and extreme heat impacts how people are going out to work, and especially for mothers, potentially not being able to have access to employment. And this is where the Clinton Global Initiative comes in. So Clinton Global Initiative is a platform that brings the public, private, and philanthropic sectors to the table to forge these lasting partnerships, so break the silos, which we've heard from quite a few others, and address many of the most urgent challenges that the world is facing today. We were launched in 2005, and since then we have proven that a unique model of convening creative partnerships and focus on accountability, which very few organizations have, is really what's needed to drive impact. So CGI, as we pride ourselves in saying, is a community of doers taking action together. And we're built across 3 pillars and the intersectionalities of this. So climate, health equity, and inclusive economic growth and recovery. And all of these, as we've heard today, are interlinked. We relaunched last year through our flagship convening on the sides of the UN General Assembly. And just to give a kind of a highlight as to kind of attendance in our community, we had about over 2,000 attendees representing the private and public sectors. We had over 140 commitments to action, and I'll cover very quickly what that means, which statistically, and I know we've talked carbon dioxide and no one wants to reduce carbon dioxide, but it does have impact on health and jobs and livelihoods. And this is about $7 billion in worth over the next about 10 years if fully funded, or rather when fully funded. So CGI partners focus on addressing some of these challenges and exchange ideas and resources to identify, elevate, and scale projects for maximum impact. I won't talk about the challenges of climate. I think we've heard enough, but we know that this is really the decade of action when we've already been seeing the Earth's resources stretched to the limits. And currently about half the world's population, which is about 3 billion people, are highly vulnerable to climate change. And as far as numbers of 2022 go, there are about 1 billion children who are potentially impacted. Food and water shortages is something which we're already experiencing, and then there's the mass die-off of ecological species, also which we are hearing about. And the climate crisis can worsen poverty, hunger, ill health, and the involuntary displacement of people, which we haven't started talking about as much, but based on some of the UNHCR numbers and some other calculations, people who are migrating because of climate and because of that food and water and wars is really one of the biggest reasons of migration, not directly attributed, but very much influenced by climate. I think you mentioned about mitigation and adaptation. And this is really the decade when we have to act with urgency on it. So mitigation, for us climate folks, is about accelerating those technologies which will reduce the energy consumption in a way, or transition to renewables. So buildings, electric vehicles, and so on. And this is the community is more focused when it comes to adaptation, because that's really accelerating geographically contextual, proactive, participatory, and transparent approaches to climate resilience, considering vulnerable communities, including children, at the community level. Now, CGI envisions a thriving people and planet, and we are elevating our community of doers and change makers and those who are taking action. So whether it is through renewable energy transition, and in the context of children, it could be clean cookstoves, it could be about transition to EVs for school buses, or a transition to renewable and solar panels at schools, direct impact with children, decarbonizing buildings, transport, and urban infrastructure, which is where a lot of our cities are focused on, because that's where children live, work, study, and play. Disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. So again, whether we're talking about extreme heat or drought. Water and waste management, again, access to water in many of the states and specific cities in the US, that's going to be felt increasingly. Nature-based solutions, so there is the reforestation aspect, but many other things. And then climate smart agriculture. Actually, we have a commitment on hydroponics at school level, which is, again, something at the education and awareness building level. So our three enablers around innovators, financing, and policy. Again, we've touched upon all of that. And women, youth, children, indigenous communities, climate refugees, forced migrants, people of color in the US are really bearing the brunt of it, and hence the reason to act. 1.5 minutes. How CGI works is through commitments to action, which are new, specific, measurable, accountable, and viable initiatives. So, climate is long-term, but it's happening now. So we are talking about projects which are ongoing, which have potential to replicate and scale, which are viably funded of about 30%, whether it's a few $1,000 worth of a project or $1 billion worth of project. Through going through, everyone's distracted, just give me 1 more minute. And this is where the role of the community comes in, by talking about what you are doing and elevating your efforts through CGI over the course of the year and through September, which is our flagship meeting here in New York. I'm just happy to share some of our major commitment makers from last year, include quite a few in terms of children. So we have Global Fund for Children. I know Joan's present here, who funding the empowerment of youth in terms of making decisions on climate funding at the community level, and they're pretty global. So South Asia, Southeast Asia, Latin America are areas of operation. We have a very specific fund for women and children related to climate impact in Colombia. And there are quite a few other commitments related to either water or urban transformation. So Block Power, New York's Empire State Building are commitment makers, which are looking at decarbonizing of buildings and infrastructure. We have, Matt Damon's Water.org and other organizations such as Safe Water Network, which are looking at providing access to water to many of these vulnerable communities. So again, even without saying climate, if you think of buildings and school buses and IRA money, that's really where the impact is directly for our children. And we invite you to make commitment with us through CGI. I'm around, and of course, the Too Small to Fail team is around. So we're very happy to break the silos and connect the climate community with the early childhood community. So thanks so much. Happy to answer any questions. We have 30 seconds. Else, speak to you after.
Thanks, Mayuri. Let's give it up again for her and all her work. In her book, Living History, Hillary Clinton wrote, "One thing we know for sure is that change is certain. Progress is not. Progress depends on the choices we make today for tomorrow and whether we meet our challenges and protect our values." Madam Secretary, this room is full of people who are trying to do just that. They're trying to meet the challenge, and we're excited that you and Chelsea and the whole Too Small to Fail community has brought everyone together. So thank you. All of us here today who've worked on behalf of young children really are here to say thank you to you. Thank you for being a tireless voice for young children. Thank you for recognizing that women's rights and the conditions of women are directly related to the conditions for children. Thank you for recognizing that human rights are child rights. I heard about Hillary Clinton for so many years when she was working on behalf of the Children's Defense Fund. I first met her in her backyard. I'm sure she does not remember this, but it was not just a common backyard. It was the backyard of the governor's mansion in Arkansas, and she was hosting the National School Readiness Task Force, and she was showing us quilts from all over the state. And I was so moved with her warmth, with her dedication, with her passion for children, which showed all through her years that she worked on behalf of children at the White House conference in 1997, 25 years ago. What happened? How did that happen? Where we looked at what does the new research on brain tell us about young children. Fast forward 25 years, we're having the same conversation with a different challenge. What is the environmental impact on children? Through all of this, through the establishment of Too Small to Fail, she's had one central message in her portfolio of wonderful messages, and that is early childhood development is a key to a better future. What else can we ask? Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of all of our hearts. Hundreds of millions of children, thank you. I'm particularly delighted that she's here with two tremendous champions for children. Catherine Russell, it is such an honor for me. I cannot tell you how important UNICEF is for the whole world and for the world of children, and I can hardly get that out without taking a breath. You took the reins during one of the most challenging times in the history of childhood. We know that, and you rose to the occasion. We know that you stand with us, and we want you to know that we stand with you. We need you to be the champion for young children in the climate conversation, and we're counting on you, and we're backing you up. Elizabeth Yee, we are delighted that the Rockefeller Foundation has been such a champion on behalf of climate and environmental issues. You have taken it from the background to the foreground, and you've shined a light, and we want to shine a light on you. Please join me in thanking these three wonderful champions and welcoming them to the stage.
Thank you all. Thank you. Wow. This is great. Thank you. Thank you. As I was walking up the stairs Joan said, we're still here. Yeah, we have been at this for a long time, and I am immensely grateful to Joan for so many reasons. All that she's done in her capacity as an advisor to Too Small to Fail, which has informed our efforts over the last 10 years. She has been instrumental in the Clinton administration, the Obama administration, and everywhere she's been in lifting up and championing young children and their healthy development. I want to thank Patty Miller, who is absolutely what a lucky day it was when she walked into our lives 10 years ago and has been just a superstar in moving Too Small to Fail. And she's had a great team around her. And we're so grateful to the whole Too Small to Fail team for their hard work. We want to thank Noggin and Paramount for hosting us. Let's give it up for them because it's a beautiful space that they have made available. And thank you all for being here because this is such a great kickoff to an essential conversation. You know, when we launched Too Small to Fail in 2013, we wanted to promote ideas and communicate around the importance of children's early brain and language development. And now we want to do the same about the relationship between children and climate and the impact that climate is having and will have going forward. Because unfortunately, kids are left out of many of the most essential conversations about the world's pressing challenges. You know, I feel like I'm a broken record, just beating the drum. Include children in everything you talk about. Don't leave out kids and what happens to them. And as Joan was saying, we hosted the first ever White House Conference on Early Childhood Development and Learning in 1997. Joan was instrumental in planning and helping us to pull that off. So this has been an ongoing conversation, and here we are in 2023. Facing the growing pressure of the global challenge of climate change. You heard from Mayuri talking about CGI commitments. We have been very focused on working with partners around the world to make commitments. Mayuri was with me in India in February when we were there to work with a group, the Self-Employed Women's Association, to deal with the problem of extreme heat. The women who work outside. We went up to the salt fields in the Rajasthan desert, and women who 7th, 8th, 9th generation workers in the salt flats. They now, by April, can't be outside for more than 3 hours, and their income depends upon, you know, collecting a lot of salt. They have increasing problems with, you know, holding instruments in the heat that burn and blister their skin. If they're pregnant, their pregnancies are at risk because of heat. Their own bodily functions are at risk. So we know firsthand what's happening at the Clinton Global Initiative because we're working with people on the ground who are living it. And we're very intent upon adding to the work we're doing through this new initiative that we're developing through Too Small to Fail, because research obviously shows that the impact of climate will be most dramatic once again on women and children. And you've already heard about the primary and secondary effects of climate change on children's health. So you already are aware of that. Some of you are experts in that. But the reason we're holding this convening is to bring together partners with diverse backgrounds, diverse knowledge bases and experiences and skill sets, because we actually do believe that cooperation, even among unlikely partners, is often what leads to meaningful change. So with that, I am thrilled to invite our two panelists that Joan mention to the stage Kathy Russell, the Executive Director of UNICEF, and Liz Yee, the Executive Vice President of Program Strategy at the Rockefeller Foundation. And it's a special treat for me to be with both of them. Kathy's a longtime friend of mine and someone whom I have had the pleasure of working with and deeply appreciate. And Liz at the Rockefeller Foundation, they're one of our partners. They're our partner with SEWA and the work in India that I was just talking about in a CGI commitment. And they are really helping to come up with new and important ways of looking at, dealing with, and hopefully addressing climate change. Kathy, I want to start with you, if I can. You know, UNICEF is doing incredible work, studying and trying to understand the scope of the issue on a global scale. But you're focused on, you know, what's happening on the ground. And I know you've traveled literally nonstop since you became the head of UNICEF. Can you share your perspective on the impact that climate change is having on young children, particularly when it comes to maternal and child health and early nutrition, and maybe give us some examples from around the world?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here, and it's really great to see you all. You know, I think the way we look at it is, we estimate, we did a report maybe two years ago about how 1 billion children in the world live in places that are at extreme risk of climate change. So first, just to think about the huge impact that climate is having on children. And the important thing, I read something where it said that you can't think about children as little adults, right? They have different physiologies, different needs, and so climate has a really dramatic impact on them. So some of the places where we see really serious challenges are around excuse me, water in particular, because if you have droughts, if you have problems where children are getting malaria, diarrhea, these are the major killers of children around the world, and they are often induced by climate. So to your specific question, I have traveled a lot. I was just in Kenya last week, I guess, in Dadaab, and saw there what I saw in Ethiopia earlier in the year, which is that it is just bone dry. I mean, that is the reality. And so you go along and they say, you know, first the animals die. Sometimes in Ethiopia, I would see the animals on the side of the road, and I've never actually seen anything like it. It's like they're just bone with skin hanging on them. So they die, and then people start to die as well. And for UNICEF, we focus on the children for the most part. And one of the worst things I've seen, Madam Secretary, and I'm sure you've seen this many times, is children who are suffering from severe malnutrition. You know, it is truly the stuff of nightmares. I mean, it's just literally babies who, you know, we call it wasting, and they just waste away. And to see that and to know that, you know, there are many things that happen around the world, many things we can't prevent, but some of these climate-related issues, we can do better if we really work on it.
Well, you know, it is so distressing to see this developing on such a large scale. You know, there's always been droughts, there's always been malnutrition, there's always been, you know, all kinds of problems, but we're now seeing it on a scale that is truly devastating. And so, Liz, I wanted to ask you, you know, immediately before this session, everyone heard from philanthropic leaders that climate philanthropy funding is just a drop in the bucket compared to what is needed given the challenges we're faced, yet we know it's such a critical drop. I mean, we can't do without the generosity of philanthropy. Can you tell us more about how the Rockefeller Foundation is approaching climate change and how you're incorporating this issue into your programmatic strategy?
Sure, I'm happy to, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for having us. And it's nice to see you all who are all so committed to the climate fight and really making sure that children and youth are at the core of how we design we've done a lot of studying. We at the foundation spend a lot of time on impact investing, and so one of the things that was incredibly striking is that 2% of resources go to climate mitigation. That was in 2020. That doesn't work. And the reality is that mitigation finance is actually really in large part going to the non-developing countries, the countries that don't really need it. And so from our perspective, what we're trying to do is really change that paradigm to really make sure that we are using our resources, our risk capital, our catalytic capital to really drive and develop solutions that work and really support those frontline communities, like you said, Madam Secretary, it's Sewa, that are depending on that, whose livelihoods and lives depend on our support. And so at the foundation, Kathy and I were talking about it in the green room, we are embarking on a whole of foundation climate strategy because we know that in order to deliver the future that we need, it's not just about our programmatic impact. It's really about bringing our entire platform, our influence strategy, our endowment, and despite our founder, we've already divested from fossil fuels, but we know we need to do more to drive that impact investing space and drive the investing space to make good and thoughtful decisions on our planet for kids. We've also looked at our operations and really thinking about how we can push forward to a more green and equitable future. And then throughout our programs, our vision is to really build and use climate to transform it from a problem to a real possibility. And to do that, we need youth at the table. So it's really thinking about how do we provide energy access and accelerate that transition? How do we look at the potential new vectors that come from climate change and the impact on health, and working with communities to make sure that they can detect and respond to those threats? It's looking at food and really thinking about, and I'm really glad you mentioned that sustainability component, because it's how do we transform the 30% of emissions that come from our agriculture supply and build both better food supply for people and for our planet. And it's also thinking about how, to my first comment, how do we transform the financial systems in a way that really delivers greater equity, especially given what we feel is our moral responsibility. Our founder was John D. Rockefeller. We need to really build on that legacy and use our capital to try to change the world for better.
Well, you've made a sweeping set of decisions to center climate, and I think that's incredibly important, and I hope sets an example for others. And Kathy, along those lines, can you tell us how UNICEF is partnering with both businesses and governments, as well as philanthropies, to lift up children in the broader climate resilience funding conversations? Because when Liz said, I think I heard this right, only 2% of all philanthropic dollars in the world go to climate mitigation, that's shocking, especially after everything we've been through and all of the rhetoric we've heard. So Kathy, from the front lines of UNICEF, what are you seeing in terms of these partnerships and funding?
I would say a couple things. One, partnerships for us are absolutely essential to everything we do, and that's we work at the local level with local partners. We work with governments around the world, and I think we're in 195 countries or some crazy number like that now. And of course, the private sector has a lot to bring to bear. I think that what we look at is in this climate context to try to make sure that it is child-focused, and in a way, I think it is a very powerful aspect of this discussion, because when people hear what the impact is on children, it is a little eye-opening and I think surprising sometimes for people. And if you think about the climate challenges in the context and from the perspective of children, I think it really does make a difference. And I think as we advocate like that, we are seeing some response. Now, as Liz said, we have a long way to go, but I'm optimistic that when people hear this and think about it, they will start to look at it differently. And so much of the discussion has been about carbon. We're not really in that discussion so much. We are really looking at how to help communities adapt and become more resilient to what's coming down the line, whether that's flooding or dry seasons that just destroy these communities. Whatever it is, trying to help communities adapt to that and understand that it is in the best of circumstances, inevitable that we're going to have some of this climate change, and how they can be better prepared to deal with it.
Well, I think you're making a really important point that we've somehow got to figure out, and this is part of what this gathering we hope will help us do, center children more in the climate debate, because it's been a binary debate. You know, fossil fuels versus clean energy, renewable fuels. I mean, that has been the headline grabber. That's been the political debate. That's been the lobbying. That's where the money's gone. And look, we've made progress. I don't want to in any way, undersell that. And I think what was accomplished in, the Biden administration and the Congress in the last 2 years could have a significant impact on how we produce and use energy. But we're still somehow kind of missing the motivating narrative that gets everybody to the table, gets everybody to understand what's at stake. And when we started Too Small to Fail, based on the latest brain and language development work, we adopted several different strategies, and one of them was going to Hollywood. We went to Hollywood. We went, Chelsea and I, to a meeting of showrunners and scriptwriters and all kinds of people who produce entertainment, mostly, not documentaries, but entertainment. And we began making the case. Look, will you show people reading, talking, or singing to babies? Because one of the evidence points we were struggling with is that still too many adults didn't think there was any reason to talk to or read to a baby because they couldn't talk back. And why would you read to them? Wait till they were older. And so we had a big selling job to do, and we were thrilled at the positive response that a number of people came forward with, and we have a little film reel of the stories of people reading, talking, and singing to infants and babies and toddlers, and talking about building the brain and creating the vocabulary. So what we're really hoping, among many other things, to come out of this gathering is, how do we center that conversation about children and climate change? And how do we center it for different audiences? I don't think most people in this country, like a developed, obviously advanced economy, sometimes I wonder, but mostly I guess we still are. I don't act like it sometimes, but that's an editorial comment. So how do we make it clear that as temperature zones change, disease moves north? I mean, we had the experience with Zika. All of a sudden, there we were, people, having all kinds of issues because they were being, bitten by mosquitoes carrying a disease we'd never heard of before. Well, we're going to see more zonal changes in diseases moving forward. So this is not just about the poor women in India or the malnourished children in Ethiopia. This is about what happens in countries like ours. It's also about the extraordinary costs of flooding and wildfires and droughts and all the rest of it. So we've got, I think, a through theme here that could be developed for different audiences that might, in a way, capture the attention of people who still are not focused or are on the fence or somehow unconvinced that this is truly an essential issue for them. And to that point, Liz, I wanted to ask you, how do we figure out how to embed the needs of children in these conversations, and not just governmental conversations or business conversations, but financing conversations, because you mentioned that as one of the focuses that Rockefeller is making.
Happy to take that on. And I think the statistics that's so striking to me is that 3.6 billion people live in these climate challenged places, and that they are mostly in emerging economies, and that inequity is just so significant. And then you layer on, Kathy, what you were saying about children. I mean, at the core, and this is what I tell my daughter and son, climate change is a behavior change issue. We need to make better and different decisions. We need to empower our youth to understand what that means and what they can do. So I've got a 10-year-old daughter who's mounting a food campaign at a school in New York, which I won't say what it is, but she is trying to get them to really understand what the opportunity is from an economic benefit from sourcing local for farmers, but also the nutrition benefit. And I guess that's, to me, she's trying to understand the finance that sits behind it, but it's also giving her a chance to make a difference and to not see this, to sort of take this challenge and realize that challenges can be opportunities and that youth can have a voice for change. We as a foundation have been supporting something called the Global Alliance for Universities, and it's basically several different, I think it's about 20 different universities in a variety of different countries, youth champions trying to help drive that change. We've been working actually with the American Conservation Coalition to actually understand how do we embrace the conservative viewpoint? How do we look at that from a youth perspective? How do we empower them? What are the tools that that we need to really look at in finance, but across the board, to really bring this conversation to a place where people can engage with it, don't feel helpless, and can really make a difference?
Yeah, that don't feel helpless is a big part of it. We've got to give bite-sized actions for everybody to be able to do, even little kids, because I think educate and empower is still a great lens to see our work through. So, Kathy, looking ahead, what are the opportunities? I mean, what are the steps that UNICEF is taking, particularly around plans for COP28, and how can others be involved, and how can we do more to support UNICEF's efforts here?
I always love that question. And the first issue, I think convenings like this are really important because they're making this connection between, children and their development and environmental issues and climate issues. And I think it's obvious once you hear it, but I don't think people really think about it until they hear it. And then once you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, I hadn't actually considered climate in that way. And so one of the things we're trying to do at COP is to make sure that this issue has a child's face on it, that people understand what these connections are and why it matters so much and why it matters differently to children, right? That's the key here. It's that, like I said earlier, they're not just little adults. They're different beings, and they are very sensitive to things like air pollution and heat. Their bodies can't tolerate that, and I just don't think people always understand that. And honestly, it wasn't even top of mind for me, and I live in this world, right? I think we need to get that word out, and I think we hopefully are doing that. We're working with the COP folks, and I think we'll make that clear. I would say that, from the UNICEF perspective, we always are looking for two things. One, great ideas. I mean, we're in the business of trying to find innovation, smart ideas, new thinking. And then the partnerships piece is really critical for us. I mean, obviously, we are always looking for resources. That's the world we live in. But it's not just that. It's really thinking about how to work together. We all live in a world where we're somewhat siloed, and we're also facing very reduced resources. The development assistance is challenged around the world. So thinking about how we can be more effective working with the private sector, working with other entities is really critical for us. And we take very seriously trying to be as careful as we can with all of our resources to make the most of them, because we know everything we do affects the lives of children around the world, and that is a responsibility that we take seriously.
So you're hopeful about COP28 shining a light on this?
Yes, I am hopeful, and I am confident that we will. We've had many conversations. I'm looking at Paloma, who is a fierce advocate and is on this mission, and I think we're going to do well. I think that for everyone, they're trying to take something that's a somewhat abstract issue and make it more concrete, and I think this does that in a really effective way. Now, there are many other issues around the climate challenge, but I do think if you try to come up with ways to make it clear how this affects humans, doing that with children is really effective.
And Liz, how about you and COP28? Will Rockefeller be part of the programming there?
We have. Yes, we will, and yes, we have. And I just wanted to say, Kathy, for the past few years, we've actually worked on 3 different pavilions at COP, health, energy, and food. And we're always next to the children's pavilion or the youth pavilion. And that pavilion is the best pavilion. It's got bands. It's really got the energy of the youth that are so committed to climate. And I think that's a real opportunity. I was reflecting, Madam Secretary, on your comment on finance, and if it's okay, I just wanted to share an interesting example of kind of how I think awesome can look like. So we've been working on food in the context of Africa and really thinking about how we can transform landscapes and opportunities. And so one of the places we've been working is in Rwanda. And we've been working closely with Minister Valentine and the education and agriculture component to really think about how food can change the nutrition landscape for children there and reduce stunting. And so one of the things that we did is we've been working with the school system to create whole grain meal for the kids. And what that has meant is that now children are actually coming to school in droves because that means that they get a really good homegrown meal. We've been working with the smallholder farmers who are actually so pleased that they now actually have an outlet for their grain in a steady economic context. And at the same time, we've been working with the millers who are equally excited because now they have also a stable revenue stream, but they actually have more content. It's 30% more content as a result of not refining grain. So kids are winning, they get better nutrition, they actually get a meal, they come to school. The millers are winning because they have more revenue, and the smallholder farmers are excited because they also have an outlet for grain, and we're creating local sourced economic opportunity. And so I think if we can work in this way, as philanthropy, we can catalyze that. We can use our financial capital to get those things moving. But then when we see the private sector come in, we can really change outcomes for people and planet. And so that's, I think, how we can change. We can use finance in a creative way to both support youth, but also empower people to take the change into their own hands.
That's a great example. Well, I know we're going to have to wrap up, but we like to always end on hope. And, it's not a strategy, but it's the fuel that keeps you going. And, Kathy, let me start with you. What do you think is the most hopeful pieces of change and information, perhaps, that you've seen that can drive this? And the same then with you, Liz.
Well, UNICEF, we do half of our work in the humanitarian space and half in development space. So I think anybody who works in the humanitarian space has to be hopeful. So I'll start there. You have no choice. I think that if you think about the way people react and think about children, right? All the talk is, what's the future? They care about the future, all the rest of it. Sometimes it's easy to say, right? But I do think if you think about issues through the perspective, the eyes of children, the perspective of children, the future of children, it does sort of make people stop and think for a second. And I do think that this combination of issues is incredibly powerful. And if we can think about ways to use these discussions to kind of bring attention to issues that people might not be thinking about, I do feel like it's a way to really have an impact. And I think, you were talking earlier about the changes in early childhood thinking. Some of that, again, seems very obvious to us now that we know it, but it wasn't always that way. And I think it's a process of educating people and giving people the knowledge they need and thinking about, I'm always, Secretary knows, is very interested in issues around women and girls, but thinking about how do we from the start give them every opportunity so they can grow up and participate in their societies and do it in a healthy and nourished way. I mean, it's an incredible privilege to be able to do the work, and I think if we make people feel like they're part of that, we can do really big things.
One of the things I had the pleasure of our foundation supported was this competition called First Global, which is really a robotics competition. At the end of the day, it was a robotics competition. However, what was really exciting was it brought children from hundreds of countries around the world to really think about how to build a robot to deal with carbon sequestration. And we sponsored 5 girls' teams. I actually spent a lot of time with the Afghan team, which was amazing. The story of their travel out of Kabul was incredible, but the things and the changes that they are driving, the innovation, the ideas that are coming out of these young girls who are really not just looking at the robotics competition and wanting to win it, which I think is awesome, but really thinking about how they can translate that into practice, into school, where they're gonna go from here in terms of college. That's what excites me. That's what gives me hope, because if I turned the tables and said, when I was 15, I was not doing First Global, I was not thinking about climate change. I love the fact that the youth are at the table. They want to be at the table. They're driving the change, and they're really taking it into their own hands. And that is what gives me hope.
Well, you two give me hope, and so does this audience. And I can only hope that we will find lots of ways to work together to push this absolutely critical issue forward. I can't thank all of you enough for being here and for being part of this conversation. And I look forward to working with you and supporting all the efforts that Too Small to Fail and climate will lead to. Thank you all very much.
Well, first of all, please join me in once again thanking that extraordinary panel, Secretary Clinton, Elizabeth Yee, and Catherine Russell. What an inspiring group of women, and what an inspiring conversation. We have almost hit 5 o'clock, and there is a reception waiting. But before we get to the reception, I just wanted to take a few moments to thank so many people who need to be thanked for putting this together today. First of all, thank you to all of you for spending your day with us. We're so delighted you joined us. We're so excited about the conversations that happened on these panels, that happened over lunch, and we're excited to continue to engage more. I also hope you'll join me in just giving a round of applause to our rock star panels for the day. What tremendous presenters, panelists, experts, and not only were just that their expertise was phenomenal, but I just feel like the conversations were both inspiring and hopeful, which is what I hope we can all leave with today. I really want to thank the amazing team at Noggin and Paramount. Shout out to Michael Levine and the whole team for enabling us to use this, just beautiful space. As we learned today, place matters, and this is a pretty fabulous place to be for a day, right? So thank you. And I also wanted to thank the entire CGI team. Not only are they amazing thought partners, they are amazing event planners, and we have learned so much from them and are so grateful to them. And I'm just grateful to the whole team, but wanted to do a shout out to Meg Ryan, who just makes events seem seamless. Yeah. It's remarkable. And at Too Small to Fail, we have a joke on our team that we literally are too small to fail. We are a team of 6 people and 1 consultant, and it is an amazing team, and I'm just so truly grateful to them. So I just wanted to acknowledge them: Perry, Nikki, Chloe, Bianelli, Mia. Thank you. This team has been working around the clock and not sleeping for several weeks, and they are tireless advocates on behalf of children, and I am just very grateful to them. And also wanted to give a shout out to our truly extraordinary consultant, Cal Lyons, who programmed this entire day and is just a remarkable person, and again, also tireless advocate on behalf of kids, and really putting the Kids in Climate connection together. So thank you so much, Cal. Our two small to fail advisors, Kevin mentioned them this morning. They are a great group. They have been with us for 10 years, which is extraordinary, and we're just grateful to them. So 4 of them have been in the room all day with us, and I just wanted to shout out to them again. Joan, Ralph, Ron, Jane, thank you guys. You're terrific. This conversation is really important to Too Small to Fail. You know, for 10 years, as the secretary mentioned, we have been all in on early brain and language development, and we recognize through the work we've been doing over the last year that climate is so critical to the conversation about young children's healthy brain development. And so as we continue to focus on brain development, we will also be focusing on this as a lens as we approach this work. And what that means looking ahead for us are 2 things. One, we've heard from all of you that these kind of conversations are important, and cross-sector conversations are really important, so we have a commitment to continue to do that, and we hope you will join us as we continue to convene around this really important topic. And we are very committed to catalyzing multi-sector commitments to action, and you've heard us talk a lot about CGI. Thank you to Mayuri for sharing more about CGI. We hope we can have conversations with all of you about making that happen. And that is, I think, it, except for we are having a reception. We will be back in touch with resources, with event information, the video. So stay tuned for more from Too Small to Fail, and please join us for wine and refreshments over there. Thank you all.